Hello everyone. In the previous video, we did this section here where we were able to prompt to create a new user. And now we just need to tidy up a few things. One of the things that we did last time was we added in this message box that the username cannot be blank. So now if we try to run this, wait for the window to pop up. If we try to submit, we get this error message. So the username cannot be blank. So we fixed that problem, right? Well, what happens if you click that? Lo and behold, the username is blank. How do we fix that? The good news is if we come in here, it's actually relatively easy to fix this. So once again, we're back into the Add User tab. And immediately after we have the return username set to the value of the text, what we want to do is we actually want to do this.dialog result, and we're going to set that to a dialog result of OK. So it's dialog result.OK. That's what we're going to set that to. Now, the other good news is using this line here, we do not need this line at all. So I'm just going to delete that line completely. I'm going to save this, and then we're going back to the form. And to handle that, then what we're going to do is before we get to where the username is actually entered in, we're going to add a conditional. So we're going to say if, and we're going to do the new user creation form.dialog result is equal to dialog result.OK. That means it is good to go. That means that we can assign this value to there. And we're fine continuing. Otherwise, let's just put a message box for now. I'm going to show you how we're going to handle it long term later, because you clear through the message box and you still got the initial problem. But for now, we just want to show that this is working. So we're going to say error username not entered, and we're just going to say that the title is going to be error. So we'll save that. Now let's run this and go through the variants. So first of all, you can see submit still doesn't work. If you just hit submit blank, it doesn't work. And if we put in a test and submit, we still get the test up here like we were expecting. So let me run this again. And this time I'm going to try and just close this. Now we get this error, username not entered. So you can see that with this one little thing in place, we now have the ability to branch off depending on what the user does. Now, what might we want to do to handle this? Well, first, let's go up to the top here. I'm going to add in a Boolean. We're going to put a flag in place to say, can the program continue? Because we want to handle this logic later on. So I'm going to say continue program, and we're going to set it to false. Okay. And when we come down here, what we can do is when the dialog result comes back, we can just put in here that the continue program is now true. And for this part, even though I don't need to say this because it has already defaulted to false at the front, I want to make sure and guarantee that if it comes into this section, we definitely have this set to false. So we're going to say it again. This step shouldn't be necessary, but I'm going to put it in anyway. So with this in mind, I'm also thinking one of the things we can do is instead of a message box, I can actually still do current user.username. And we're just going to say you must have a username to use this program. So it's going to display this as the text instead. And so we can come down here because displaying the text doesn't matter for whether we save it or not, but we do want to save our file if it's valid. If it is a username, we do not want to save it if it is not. So to do that, we can then put here if continue program, then we can continue doing what we need to do, else the user cannot access anything else. Now, why might I want to do this? Why not just lock it up for the user, close it, give an error message, whatever we want to do. Say, nope, can't use it, it's invalid. Well, again, I want to be nice to the user. A user might mistakenly click the close button. So one way that we can help them out is if they do mistakenly close the program, we can come up to this file, and we can just add in another menu, and we can call this one and new. And for tradition, I'm going to grab this and scroll up with it, drag it to the top, because we want the new to be on top. So what happens if we do that? Well, let's double click on this. And what we want it to do here is we want it to just repeat the same thing that we had up here. So this same logic here should just be repeated down here. So we'll do this just to show that this could still work. So do that. I want to get rid of this line here. What I'm going to do is move this up to make it a global as well, because we can use the current user in many different things. So putting it outside of that now makes it accessible in here too. So if we save this, we run this, this pops up like normal, and we accidentally do this and it says you must have a username to use this program. Well, we can hit on that, click that, and now we've got this exact same thing back. So this is a way to allow a user to still have access without just locking everything out, but we continue to lock them out of the spots that would be relevant to continuing. A better way to handle this then is that we want to make this section that we pasted in here its own function. And then we can refer to this function in two different locations without having to type it or copy and paste it. And if we make changes later, which I'm planning on doing, we don't want to have to go through and find this in multiple places. So I'm going to move this into a new function. All right, so let's go up here a ways, and we'll do it right before this form. And this doesn't need to have anything that gets sent back, so we can do this as a private void, and we will just call this create user as a function. And it does help, again, if you spell things correctly. So this, again, is a private void function. Now let's just go down here, and we will grab all of this out. And this is the menu one, so we'll delete this. And basically all we're going to do is we're going to call create user as a function. That's the only thing that we'll do in here. And what we'll do here is we'll take all of, let's see, we'll want everything from here up to this part here. We will copy that, and I think I've got an extra close bracket in there. Yes. Delete this, I think. There we go. Now this is lined up not quite correctly, but move that indented in. So now when this comes in, we will create the new form, have it come through here, but we still need it to get to this logic afterwards. So I'm thinking here, I do think I want to include this afterwards. So we come back up to here because we want it to go ahead and do that. But in that case, what we're going to have to do is have it where it jumps out from here to continue with whatever we've got. The reason why I'm thinking of having this just going to another function is because if we have it entering there from here, how do we get it back to where it's at this part? The easiest way to do it is to actually end it before we get to this part, and then just use a function. Bring this back up to there. We delete that. And we've got this, and this is going to be create user that we'll put in here as well. And this basically, once we do this part, we don't need to do anything else with this form. It's done, and we will control the branches from here. So just to give an example, so if I say void, let's see, this is going to be user entered. And I'm probably going to update this after I'm done with this. And we'll do a message box show username successfully entered. And then we can also have private void user denied. We'll just say denied for now. And what we'll do here, copy this. Actually, I do want a title on it as well. So success the title, and then we will do failure for this one, and username, we will say not entered. So if this gets fulfilled here, what we will do is we will then jump to user entered. Otherwise, we will go to user denied. So this is going to be how we will control the flow. And if I put everything in correctly, then when I run this, it should work for both ways. So here we go. This pops up. If I hit submit, we should still see this correct. If I then close, we'll see username not entered. Then we come back to this. I can hit file new. This comes back up. If I hit this again, username not entered. If I hit file new and then say Peter and submit, username successfully entered, and you can see up here it is updated there. So this is working as intended, and at this point we could actually just say we're done with the entire main function. Let's just say this is going to be the entry to program, because it's no longer the main function. We can now move everything that we want to do into this is what happens once we get the username, and this is what happens if we don't have a username. So we can completely separate them out, and then we don't have to worry about like doing all of the flags to see is this working or not. So even though we've created two more functions up above in this area, it's actually simplified what happens down below. It's just a single call to each of these, and we can call this create user as often as we want. Now, of course, this is not a completely satisfied thing because we still haven't saved the user to a file. That's going to be our next step. And we still have to actually handle the logic of what happens when they actually put in a username. So when it really does exist. So that's up here. For example, one thing that we definitely need to do is, if you remember, I've added this Boolean up here for a continue program, and it's defaulting to false. We do, if we load this, we do need to change that to true. So this is going to be continue program is now true. If we don't do this, then it will stop working wherever we're using that continue program. So we want to stop that. And in fact, probably what we want to do is after we're done with this little section, we're going to load the context of the file and all of that. Then somewhere down a ways here, so I'll just put like do stuff here as a, just to say we're going to be doing whatever we need to with the file. Then at the end of it, we're going to then go to user entered and continue at that point. So with that in mind, let's think of our next steps. The first thing to note is that having moved this into its own function, the create user function, then we have the ability to actually create this from this menu, even if there already were loaded other users. So the fact that we initially go into it based on the file not being found, in this case, doesn't actually matter when we get to this point. We might still be adding a new user to an existing list of users. So one of the things that we should do is actually check this again down here. This, whether this file exists or not. Now, I don't like copying this code over and over again. So I'm actually thinking of doing a different method here. So if we come back up to the top, we've got our current user as a new user. But what we can do here is we can do a list of users, and we will call this all users. And this will be a new list of users. So we'll create this character, or we'll create this variable, and we'll have all users listed. Now what we can do is when we come down here, we're going to, when we do stuff at this point, this is when it exists. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the list of all users. And that's going to drive me crazy if we don't fix it. So one thing that we can check up here when we come into this create user, before we save the data, which will be down here, and we want to do that before we launch over to the user entered section, then what we're going to want to do is check if the list of all users is empty, If not, add to it. If it is, create a new user. And then, of course, and then add to the list. So this is just one method of how we can do it. There's other ways that you can decide to change the logic around if you want to do that. But I'm just going to do this method right here, and we'll get to that right now. All right, so first thing is we need to find out what the count is. So we do a simple thing. Let's make an integer, and we're going to do user count is the all users dot count. What this will do is it will give a count of how many users exist in the list of users. When we create a user, we need to make sure there are no duplicates. So this check will need to be done anyway, so we might as well include all of it in the same thing. So let's do a for int I equals 0, I less than user count, and we do I++. So this will loop through all of the numbers from 0 up to however many we've got in this count of users. All right, so the first thing that we're going to need is we'll need a temporary Boolean to say user found, or let's call it a duplicate user, and we're going to set this to false for now. Now, as we go through it, we need to have the username that is pulled. So it's going to be this current username. So this is the one that we're trying to get. So we're going to make a check at this point. And what this check is going to do is if this current username is the same thing as, and it actually filled it out for us, so I can actually do this. So it's going to loop through, it will find the index of the all user, and it will have this username. So if it finds it, then what we can do is we can then say duplicate user is true, and then we can just break out of this. We don't need to continue at that point because we've already got a duplicate. So once we get through that, now we've got a duplicate user that already exists, and we're going to have to tell the user that they can't use this username. So if it's a duplicate user, and honestly at this point, this is pretty nice that the IntelliSense is actually going exactly with where I'm thinking on this, because this is a fairly straightforward and common way of doing things. So if there is a duplicate user, then what we're going to do is send out a message, message box show, and just say, unfortunately, that username is already being used. And we'll just call this an error up here. And then that, and then what we will want to do is when they hit OK, we want to send them back to where they can create another username if that's what they want. So at this point, we can then send them back up to the top of the very function that we're in. So they'll return to it. So again, this is only going to happen if they are already in there. And I just saw I'm missing a semicolon there. So let's get that. So if we got a duplicate, it will kick it out. If it's not a duplicate, then all we have to do at this point is we will need to add a user. And the way that we're going to add the user count, if there is 0 items, it's going to be 0 users to begin with. And we want to start with ID of 0. If there's 1 already in there, then the user count would be 1. And the next, the user count that would exist would have the ID of 0. So we would want the next ID to be 1. So basically, we will want the ID to be the user count. We don't need to change the user count at all. So what we need to do is use the current user that we've already got, and current user, there we go. And the ID will now be set to user count. Now, the next step, we've already assigned the username to this object. So we've already got that here. So, sorry, I just scrolled on there. So basically, the only thing we need to do now is add this to the list of all users. And we do that by saying all users.add, and then we're going to add in the current user like this. So this adds it to the complete list. Finally, we need to export this to a file, and we need to save it. Now, so to save it, we need to know how we're going to represent this file in the text file. So basically, you can't just save an object. You have to save each individual field, and then read back each individual field. And the best way to do this is sort of by, like if you've ever seen a comma separated value sheet, a CSV, they're just fields that are separated with commas. Well, because we could potentially be using sentences which have punctuation, I don't want to use a comma, but I can think of a separator that's not commonly used. So if I do a string of separator, and that equals this, for example, that's the little caret icon. The caret's not used that frequently, and we could use that to split up items, but it's still possible that somebody might use this in a language. And so we want to pick something that's not used typically in languages. All right, so first of all, we don't need this here anymore. Now, I'm going to create these as part of the global variables because we're going to need to use these in multiple places. And what I'll be using is certain ASCII characters that aren't printable, so we don't have to worry about somebody accidentally typing them. So we can do, for example, I think these will actually be characters, so I can do a character. First one will be the, we'll say field separator, and we will have this, and you can see here kind of like one of the ways that it does this. Now, I'm not sure what this Unicode value will end up being, so instead of using this one, just in case it is typable, what I will do is use this, because I know that ASCII code number 29 is one of the delimiters. And then we will do a line separator, and we will do character of 30. So this will just make single characters, and these will be what we will include into lines wherever we need to see them to split the text up appropriately, or when we're reading a file to know how to split the file that we're reading correctly. And so I know this is probably going to be a little bit of a longer episode that I'm working on, but let's go ahead and get this done here. Now, we need to construct an output variable. So to do this output, we're going to just repeat this same thing up here, except that we're going to need to include the new record that we already added. So it's going to be one larger. So we can actually do our for loop a little bit different than up above. I could have done this up above as well, but instead of actually creating a different variable, then we say when I is less than, and we'll do the all users dot count, and then I plus plus. So it's already got the rest of this there. Then what we want to do is we want a local variable. So this is going to be a string send output. Send output. And I will just say it started off as null. Then what we're going to want to do here is we're going to start by taking the all users i.id, and we need to add this to our send output. And since this is going to be looping, we actually need to include what was before. And we're going to add this. And then we're going to add the field separator. Then we're going to do send output. And that's going to equal the send output. And yes, I see that I misspelled up here. And now it's going to be the all users. It's still going to be the I one, but now it's going to be the username. And instead of the field separator, we're going to do the line separator. And so as this loops through, it will turn everything into a string that will be separated based on those field separators. So a little bit complicated, but when it's all said and done, we will now have the send output. The send output can now be sent to save. So we want to save data. And that's going to first need the file name, this here, which of course doesn't exist anywhere else, but we can just do this again. We'll just copy it from here. We'll come up to this part. We'll once again just have this because we need it by the time we get to this. And we're going to have this now be the check file. And again, because this file is local to this particular function that we're using, then we don't have to worry about the fact that it's got the same name as what's down here. So Then once we've got the file name there, then what we are giving this is going to be the send output. That is what we are actually going to send to this file. We're going to save that and then go to the user entered item here. So this is how we can actually create a file. Now, let me save this and let's see if this works. So we'll run this first. This will come up. And if I say I am Peter and we submit this, username successfully entered, hit OK, it shows on here. I will close out of this. Now, we should have, if this worked correctly, we go to the bin debug this, and we have a user.dat. And if we, let's open this with Notepad, you can see it's got the gibberish characters that it can't be printed, but it did store exactly what I wanted it to store. We have a 0, we have a character that can't be displayed, and then we have my name and another character that can't be displayed. And what this means is that we will be able to grab this same data in reverse and then split it out and have usernames. And unfortunately, the only problem is, given the time, we will have to do that in the next video.